The city buzzed with life as Christmas decorations lit up every corner of New York. Storefronts gleamed with garlands of silver and gold. Children pressed their noses against frosty glass displays, and holiday music spilled out from speakers on every block. To most, it was a magical time, a season of joy and connection. But to Elon Musk, it was a stark, bitter reminder of everything he had lost. 1 year, 365 excruciating days since Clara, his daughter, his light, had disappeared. The night she vanished was etched into his memory as if carved in stone. Clara had bounded down the stairs of their Manhattan penthouse, a bright smile lighting up her face. She was wearing the green sweater he bought her the week before, her auburn curls bouncing with every step. She had turned to him, holding out her hand with the grace of someone so young, so unaware of the dangers of the world. "Dad, I'm heading out to grab something for the party," she had said, her tone casual. "I'll be back soon, promise." He had smiled, distracted by an incoming email. "All right, sweetheart, don't take too long." Those had been his last words to her. Clara had never made it back. Elon sat stiffly in the back of his chauffeured car, his eyes fixed on the window as they glided through the city. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the darkened sky, landing on the rooftops and sidewalks in perfect silence. The world outside moved on, vibrant and alive, while he remained trapped in the stasis of his grief. His hands rested on his lap, clenching and unclenching as his mind wandered back to that awful night. She'd been gone for hours before he'd realized something was wrong. He had called her cell repeatedly, each ring feeling like a tightening noose. By the time he contacted the police, it was nearly midnight. Every moment since then had been a relentless cycle of hope and despair. Detectives had scoured the city for weeks, poring over surveillance footage, canvassing witnesses, and chasing down leads. None of it amounted to anything. The only clue, a single grain of sand in the vast desert of their investigation, was a description from a cashier at a small boutique. Clara had been seen purchasing a wrap gift and chatting with the shopkeeper just hours before she vanished. The surveillance cameras in the area, maddeningly, had been out of order. Elon swallowed hard, the pain of the memory cutting like glass. He still remembered the moment he realized the police were no closer to finding her. "We'll keep looking," the lead detective had said, his voice low and apologetic. "But I won't lie to you, Mr. Musk. The longer it takes, the harder it gets." That was the day he had stopped believing in miracles. The car came to a halt. "We're here, sir," the driver said, his voice breaking into Elon's thoughts. He stepped out, greeted by the cold slap of December air. He hadn't asked the driver to take him anywhere specific, only to drive until Elon said to stop. Now he stood on a bustling street corner, where pedestrians bustled by with bags full of gifts, their faces alight with holiday cheer. He stuffed his hands into the pockets of his black wool coat, bowing his head against the icy wind. Without thinking, his feet carried him towards Central Park. It had been one of Clara's favorite places. She'd loved the winding paths, the open fields, and especially the skating rink, where she'd spin and glide with a grace he envied. "Dad, you've got to try it." She'd laugh, teasing him as he clutched the wall for balance. The memory twisted in his chest like a knife. As he entered the park, the sounds of the city dimmed, replaced by the crunch of snow underfoot and the faint hum of holiday carolers. Their voices were hauntingly beautiful, each note a sharp reminder of the season's cruel irony. How could the world continue to celebrate when his was in ruins? He stopped near a frozen pond, gazing out at the pristine sheet of ice. Children skated in circles, their laughter rising in the cold air. A father lifted his daughter into his arms, spinning her around as she squealed with delight. Elon turned away, the sight too painful to bear. He found a bench and sat heavily, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. His breath escaped in cloudy puffs, his heart a cold, hollow drum in his chest. He had tried to move on, to pour himself into work, but even his legendary focus couldn't shield him from the all-encompassing void Clara's absence had left. For a brief moment, he pulled out his phone and stared at the lock screen. It was the last photo he had of Clara, taken just days before she disappeared. She was smiling, her hazel eyes full of mischief, the star-shaped pendant he'd given her hanging proudly from her neck. The pendant. He reached instinctively into the inner pocket of his coat, feeling for the small velvet case he always carried. Inside was the matching pendant, identical in every way to the one Clara had worn. It had been a gift he'd picked out with care, something she'd cherished. Now, it was the only tangible connection he had left to her. He opened the case, running his thumb over the smooth, cold surface of the star. Its edges gleamed faintly in the moonlight. "Where are you, Clara?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The wind picked up, scattering snowflakes around him. It felt almost as though the world were answering, its voice a soft, mournful wail. Elon sat there for what felt like hours, the city's life and noise fading into the background. For the first time in a year, he allowed himself to cry, silent tears streaming down his face as the weight of his grief overwhelmed him. As he finally rose to his feet, he made a silent vow. He would carry this pain, shoulder this unbearable weight, until he had answers. Until he knew what had happened to his daughter. The festive lights of the city glimmered in the distance, their beauty sharp and unrelenting. For Elon, there was no warmth in them, only the promise of another long, empty night. The wind nipped at Elon's face as he wandered aimlessly through Manhattan's labyrinth of streets. His grief was a weight on his shoulders, heavy and suffocating. He wasn't sure where he was going. He only knew that the oppressive silence of his penthouse was unbearable. As he turned a corner, he found himself in front of a familiar building. The small, rustic sign above the door read, "Café Siena" in faded cursive letters. A soft glow spilled from its large front window, illuminating the snow-dusted sidewalk. Elon stopped in his tracks, staring at the cafe as if it were a ghost. This place. It had been Clara's favorite. For a moment, he stood frozen, the memories rushing back with dizzying clarity. Clara had loved this cozy little spot. They'd spent countless afternoons here, sipping hot chocolate and sharing pastries while she filled him in on the latest teenage drama or her dreams for the future. The last time they had come here, she had insisted on ordering a peppermint mocha and teasing him for sticking to plain black coffee. He could almost hear her voice, bright and full of laughter, as he pushed open the door. A tiny bell jingled overhead as he stepped inside. The warm air embraced him, carrying with it the rich scents of coffee, cinnamon, and freshly baked bread. For a brief moment, Elon felt the smallest flicker of comfort. The cafe hadn't changed. The same wooden tables and chairs were arranged neatly in the intimate space. The walls were adorned with string lights and chalkboards listing the day's specials in playful handwriting. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, its ornaments glinting softly. Elon approached the counter, his boots clinking softly against the floor. A young man, perhaps in his early 20s, stood behind the counter, adjusting the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. He had a kind, boyish face, framed by slightly unkempt dark hair. "Good evening," the young man greeted with a warm smile. "What can I get for you?" Elon hesitated, glancing at the menu out of habit rather than interest. "Just black coffee, please." The young man nodded and began preparing the order, moving with the effortless ease of someone who knew the rhythm of the cafe well. Elon's eyes wandered as he waited, taking in the small details he'd missed the first time. A couple sat in the corner, laughing softly. A woman typed furiously on her laptop, her latte forgotten beside her. "Here you go," the barista said, sliding a steaming cup across the counter. Elon reached for it, but as the young man's hand moved away, something caught his eye. His breath hitched. Around the barista's neck, hanging loosely from a simple leather cord, was a star-shaped pendant. Not just any pendant. The pendant. The same design, the same size, the same unmistakable detail on its edges. It was identical to the one he had given Clara. Elon froze, his hand trembling as he gripped the cup. For a moment, his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. It couldn't be. It was impossible. And yet there it was, gleaming faintly under the cafe's soft lights. "Sir," the barista asked, his smile faltering. "Everything all right?" Elon forced himself to nod, his throat dry. "Yes, fine. Thanks." The young man gave a polite nod before turning to wipe down the counter. Elon's eyes remained locked on the pendant, his heart pounding. A rush of questions filled his mind, each one louder than the last. Where had this man gotten it? How was it here, of all places? Elon moved to a table near the counter, setting his cup down untouched. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together as he stole glances at the barista. He had to know more. He had to say something. But how? The man turned again, catching Elon's gaze for the briefest moment. "Let me know if you need anything else," he said, his tone friendly but guarded. "Actually," Elon began, his voice wavering slightly. The barista paused, tilting his head curiously. "That pendant you're wearing," Elon said, forcing his tone to remain casual. "It's unusual. I've seen one like it before." The young man's hand instinctively moved to the pendant, his fingers brushing over it protectively. "Oh, this," he said with a shrug. "Yeah, it's kind of unique, isn't it? Got it as a gift." "A gift?" Elon pressed, trying to keep his expression neutral. The man nodded, his smile returning but not quite reaching his eyes. "Yeah, someone gave it to me a while back. Thought it was cool. So I started wearing it." Elon's stomach churned. His instincts screamed that there was more to the story, but the barista's tone left little room for further questions. "Well, it's striking," Elon said, leaning back in his chair. "Thanks," the barista replied, quickly changing the subject. "So, are you in town for the holidays?" Elon barely heard the question. His mind was racing, piecing together fragments of possibility. That pendant, there was no doubt in his mind that it was the same as Clara's. But how had it ended up around this man's neck? The barista's name tag caught his eye. "Ethan." "Yeah, just visiting," Elon said absent-mindedly, his focus still on the pendant. He clenched his jaw, his pulse thundering in his ears. As Ethan moved to help another customer, Elon sat in silence, staring at his untouched coffee. The familiar warmth of the cafe had vanished, replaced by a chilling realization. This was no coincidence. Elon sat at the small table, his coffee growing cold as he struggled to control his thoughts. The pendant around Ethan's neck was like a lighthouse in a storm, drawing his focus no matter how hard he tried to think rationally. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to demand answers, to grab the young man by the shoulders and ask, "Where did you get that?" But he knew better. Patience. He needed patience. Ethan worked behind a counter with practiced ease, moving between customers with a polite efficiency. Elon watched him closely, searching for any sign of nervousness or unease, but Ethan seemed calm, even cheerful. Yet something felt off, though Elon couldn't quite put his finger on it. Finally, Elon stood and approached the counter, trying to exude an air of casual curiosity. Ethan looked up from the espresso machine and offered the same friendly smile as before. "Everything all right?" Ethan asked, drying his hands on a towel. Elon nodded, clearing his throat. "Yeah, just thought I'd get a refill." He held up his nearly untouched cup. "Sure thing," Ethan replied, taking the cup and turning to the coffee pot. Elon decided to test the waters. "So, Ethan, how long have you been working here?" Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "A little over a year now. It's a good gig. Chill customers, decent tips. Beats some of the other jobs I've had." "A year, huh?" Elon said, his tone light. "You must have been here last Christmas." Then Ethan hesitated for the briefest moment, barely perceptible, before pouring the coffee. "Yeah, I guess so. Time flies." He placed the refilled cup on the counter and slid it toward Elon. "You from around here?" Elon pressed, picking up the cup. "Not really," Ethan said, leaning against the counter. "I've moved around a lot. Kind of a nomad, you know? But New York's not a bad place to land." Elon studied him carefully, noting how Ethan's answers were just vague enough to keep the conversation from veering too personal. He decided to shift gears, leaning on the one detail he couldn't ignore. "That pendant you're wearing, it's really something," Elon said, his eyes locking onto the star-shaped charm. "Looks almost handmade." Ethan's hand instinctively went to the pendant, his fingers brushing over it. "Yeah, it's special to me. Got it as a gift. From someone close," Elon asked, keeping his tone conversational but watching for any reaction. Ethan hesitated, his gaze flickering to the side. "I guess you could say that." Elon's pulse quickened. The evasiveness in Ethan's response was subtle, but it was there. He decided to push a little further. "Funny thing," Elon said, his voice steady. "I've seen a pendant just like that before. Gave one to someone special. Actually." Ethan stiffened almost imperceptibly, his smile faltering for a split second before he recovered. Small world, I guess." "Yeah," Elon said, his gaze unwavering. "Small world." For a moment, an uneasy silence hung between them. Ethan busied himself by wiping the counter, avoiding Elon's eyes. "Well," Elon said finally, forcing a smile. "Thanks for the coffee. I'll probably be back tomorrow." "Sure thing," Ethan replied, his tone polite but distant. Elon returned to his table, but he didn't sit. Instead, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. As he stepped outside, the cold air hit him like a slap, but it did little to clear the storm raging in his mind. Ethan was hiding something. Of that, Elon was certain. The way he had deflected questions about the pendant, the subtle tension in his responses, all pointed to something deeper. As he walked away from the cafe, Elon's hand went to his coat pocket, brushing against the velvet case inside. The pendant, his pendant, Clara's pendant. There was no way this was coincidence. Elon stopped at the edge of the street, staring blankly at the passing traffic. His thoughts churned as he tried to piece together the fragments of this strange encounter. Could Ethan have known Clara? Was he involved in her disappearance? The questions swirled like a blizzard, blinding him to everything else. One thing was certain. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to find them by staying quiet. The elevator hummed softly as it ascended to Elon's penthouse. He leaned against the mirrored wall, staring at his reflection. His face was drawn and pale, the lines around his eyes deeper than he remembered. He barely recognized himself. The door slid open with a quiet chime, and he stepped into the dark, cavernous space. The penthouse was silent except for the faint hum of the city below, its twinkling lights stretching out to the horizon. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, its decorations untouched since Clara had disappeared. He had put it up out of some sense of obligation, but it only served as a painful reminder of what he'd lost. Elon crossed the room to his study, where the air was cool and still. The safe was tucked discreetly behind a sliding panel in the wall. He hesitated for a moment, his fingers brushing over the keypad. This small act, opening the safe, felt like opening a wound. But he had to know. The keypad beeped softly as he entered the code. The panel clicked open, revealing the velvet-lined interior of the safe. There it was, lying exactly as he had left it, the star-shaped pendant he had given Clara. Elon picked it up carefully, as if it were fragile. He ran his fingers over its surface, tracing the delicate engraving along the edges. Every detail was identical to the one he had seen earlier at the cafe. There was no mistaking it. He set the pendant down on his desk, his mind racing. How could Ethan have a copy of something so unique? Clara had always said the pendant made her feel like she was carrying a piece of him with her. The idea of someone else wearing it felt like a violation, but it also filled him with a desperate hope. What if Clara had given it to Ethan? Elon sat down heavily in his chair, staring at the pendant. His thoughts churned, sifting through the fragments of the past year. The police had found no evidence of foul play, but Elon had never believed that Clara had simply run away. She had no reason to. Their relationship had been close, unusually so, he'd always thought, for a teenager and her father. He reached for his phone, opening the photo album he had created after Clara's disappearance. It was a collection of her pictures, notes, and little mementos he couldn't bear to let go of. He scrolled through the photos until he found one that showed her wearing the pendant. Her smile was wide and full of life, the charm gleaming against her sweater. The image blurred as tears welled in his eyes. He set the phone down, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Where are you, Clara?" he whispered. The question echoed in the stillness of the room. The thought of Ethan wearing that pendant gnawed at him. There was only one explanation that made sense. Ethan had met Clara. And if he had met her, he might know what had happened to her. But there was something about Ethan that didn't sit right. The way he had dodged Elon's questions, the guarded look in his eyes, it all pointed to something deeper. Elon didn't trust him. Not yet. He needed to know more. Elon opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he searched for private investigators in the city. His resources were vast, and he wasn't afraid to use them. Within minutes, he had narrowed the list down to a select few. He chose the one with the highest reviews, a man named Marcus Kane. Kane picked up on the second ring. His voice was gruff, but professional. "Marcus Kane. Mr. Kane, my name is Elon Musk," he said, wasting no time. "I need someone discreet to look into a person for me. I'll pay handsomely for your time." There was a pause. Then Kane replied, "I'm listening." Elon explained the situation briefly, but left out the more emotional details. "I need to know everything about this man, his background, his connections, and where he's been for the past year. I'll need a name and a location," Kane said. "His name is Ethan. He works at Cafe Sienna on 28th Street. That's all I have right now. Consider it done," Kane said. "I'll be in touch within 48 hours." Elon ended the call and leaned back in his chair, his mind still racing. He picked up Clara's pendant again, holding it tightly in his hand. The cold metal pressed against his palm, grounding him. If there was even the slightest chance that Ethan knew something about Clara, Elon was going to find out. The city moved on, as it always did, an unstoppable current of lives intersecting and diverging. But for Elon, time seemed to crawl as he waited for Marcus Kane's call. The pendant remained on his desk, a silent witness to his restless pacing and sleepless nights. Finally, on the evening of the second day, his phone buzzed. Elon snatched it up immediately. "This is Musk," he said, his voice taut with anticipation. "Kane here," came the investigator's gruff voice. "I've got information on your guy. And let me tell you, it's not pretty." Elon felt his stomach tighten. "Go on." Ethan Bennett, 22 years old. No fixed address until about a year ago, when he started working at Cafe Sienna. Before that, he bounced around the foster system. Most of his records are sealed, but I got enough to paint a picture. He's been through some rough patches. Arrested twice for petty theft as a teenager, but no convictions. He's clean as far as the law is concerned, but here's where it gets interesting. Elon sat down, gripping the phone tightly. "I dug deeper," Kane continued. "There's a pattern. Ethan spent time in a group home that was shut down for abuse and negligence. After that, he fell off the radar for a while. When he resurfaced, he was connected to a group that operates on the fringe, real shady types. They're suspected of being involved in trafficking, among other things. No solid evidence, though. These people cover their tracks. Trafficking. The word hit Elon like a punch to the gut. "Do you have any proof Ethan is directly involved with these people?" Elon asked, his voice sharp. "Not yet," Kane admitted. "But there's more." Ethan's name came up in a report about a missing girl. This was a few years back, in another state. The girl was eventually found, but she was too scared to talk. The report hinted that she might have been coerced into some kind of operation. Ethan wasn't charged, but he was listed as an associate of interest. Elon's mind raced. The pieces were starting to come together, though the picture they formed was horrifying. If Ethan was connected to a trafficking ring, could it explain Clara's disappearance? Does Ethan have any current ties to this group? Elon asked. Hard to say. He's careful, keeps his head down, works a low-profile job. But I found a name that might be connected. A guy named Victor Mason. He's a known player in the trafficking world. Runs things out of an old industrial area on the outskirts of the city. If Ethan's still mixed up with these people, Mason's the one pulling the strings. Elon felt a surge of determination. Can you find out if Mason is still active? I'll keep digging, Kane said. But listen, Musk, these are dangerous people. You don't want to go knocking on their door without a solid plan. I understand, Elon said, though his resolve was unshaken. Kane hesitated. One more thing. That pendant you mentioned, it's not just some trinket, is it? No, Elon said quietly. It belonged to my daughter. She disappeared a year ago. Kane was silent for a moment. I'll keep you updated. And Musk, be careful. The line went dead. Elon set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, his thoughts a whirlwind. The mention of trafficking had sent a chill through him, but it also ignited a fire. If Clara had been taken by these people, he needed to act, and fast. His eyes fell on the pendant once more. Clara had loved it, cherished it. If she had passed on to Ethan, there had to be a reason. Elon stood, his jaw set. The path ahead was dangerous, but he didn't care. If there was even the slightest chance that Clara was still out there, he would stop at nothing to find her. The days after Kane's findings had passed in a fog of restless tension. Elon hardly left his penthouse, his thoughts consumed by the details the investigator had uncovered. The mere mention of trafficking had unraveled whatever fragile composure he had managed to maintain over the past year. If Ethan was involved, if the group Kane had identified had any ties to Clara's disappearance, then Elon had no time to waste. It was late evening, and the city outside his penthouse windows sparkled in a festive display of lights. The tree-lined streets below were bustling with holiday shoppers, their energy a cruel contrast to the heavy silence that filled the room. Elon sat at his desk, the pendant Clara had cherished resting on the polished wood before him. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, his thoughts circling endlessly. His mind was a storm, memories of Clara's laughter mixed with haunting images of what might have happened to her. Every possibility was worse than the last. The buzzing of his phone jolted him upright. He snatched it from the desk without looking at the screen, his pulse quickening. "This is Musk," he said, his voice taut. The line crackled faintly, but there was no immediate reply. He frowned. "Hello, who is this?" For a moment, there was only the sound of faint breathing on the other end. Then, a woman's voice, trembling and soft, broke the silence. "She's alive," the woman said. Elon froze. His grip on the phone tightened, his mind racing. "What? Who is this? Who's alive?" The woman's breathing quickened, panic lacing her words. "Your daughter, Clara. She's alive." The world seemed to tilt beneath him. Elon shot to his feet, knocking the chair back as he paced to the window. "Where is she? How do you know this? Who are you?" The woman's voice cracked, as though she were struggling to hold herself together. I can't tell you who I am. They're watching me. They're watching her. She's alive, but it's not safe. Time is running out." Elon's heart pounded in his chest. "Who's watching her? What are you talking about? Please, tell me where she is." Static interrupted the call for a brief moment, and Elon clutched the phone tighter, as if sheer willpower could keep the connection alive. "Please, don't hang up." She tried to, the woman began, but her words were cut off by a burst of crackling. "No, wait," Elon shouted, his voice raw. The line went dead. He stood there, his breathing ragged, staring at the phone as if it might magically reconnect. The silence that followed was deafening, the woman's words reverberating in his mind. "She's alive. Time is running out." Elon's knees felt weak, and he stumbled to the couch, dropping into it heavily. His hands shook as he set the phone down on the coffee table. The faint scent of pine from the untouched Christmas tree filled the room, but it offered no comfort. The voice had been familiar in some way, though he couldn't place it. There had been a desperation in her tone, a fear so palpable it sent chills down his spine. Whoever she was, she had risked everything to reach out to him. But what had she meant by "they're watching her"? Who were they? Was it the group Kane had mentioned? Was Clara still in their clutches, or had she escaped? The questions flooded his mind, each one more urgent than the last. He buried his face in his hands, his breaths shallow and uneven. For a year, he had clung to the faintest hope that Clara was alive. Now, that hope burned brighter, but it was laced with terror. If Clara was alive, she was in danger. And if time was running out, he couldn't afford to hesitate. His first instinct was to call Marcus Kane. He grabbed his phone and dialed the line connecting after only 2 rings. Kane, the investigator, answered, his voice gruff. "I just got a call," Elon said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "A woman. She said Clara's alive. She didn't give her name or location, but she sounded terrified." The line cut out before I could get anything else. Kane was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his tone was measured, cautious. "You're sure it wasn't some kind of prank? Families of missing people get targeted all the time. There are scammers who'll say anything for a quick buck. It wasn't a prank," Elon snapped, his frustration boiling over. "She knew my name. She knew Clara's name. She sounded like she was running for her life." Kane's tone softened slightly. "All right. Did the number trace?" Elon checked the call history. "Unlisted," he said through clenched teeth. "Figures," Kane muttered. "If this woman's legit, she's probably using a burner phone. Sounds like she's scared. Real scared." "She said Clara was being watched," Elon continued. "And that time was running out. What could that mean? Could it be Mason's group?" "It's possible," Kane said. "But if she's telling the truth, it means whoever's holding your daughter knows how to cover their tracks. These people don't mess around. If Clara's still alive, and they think she's a liability," he trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging heavily in the air. Elon's stomach churned. "So what do we do?" Kane exhaled. "We keep digging. I'll double down on this Mason lead, see if there's been any movement in his operations. If there's even a whisper of activity, I'll find it. But you, stay alert. If this woman calls back, don't push her too hard. Let her talk. We need details, anything that could point us in the right direction." Elon nodded, though Kane couldn't see him. "Fine. Just keep me updated." "You got it," Kane said before the line went dead. Elon set the phone down on the coffee table and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing was crystal clear. Clara was alive. The faint glimmer of hope that had sustained him for the past year now burned fiercely, propelling him forward. Whoever this woman was, whatever danger Clara was in, Elon wasn't going to stop until he brought his daughter home. The following morning, Elon awoke from a restless sleep with his mind already racing. The woman's call had changed everything. Clara wasn't just a memory anymore. She was alive, somewhere, trapped in the clutches of people who meant her harm. Every moment he spent doing nothing felt like an eternity wasted. He had barely touched the breakfast that his assistant had brought up. The plate of eggs and toast sat untouched on the counter, while Elon stared at the pendant in his hands, the twin of the one Ethan had been wearing. He couldn't shake the feeling that the answers he sought were closer than they seemed. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Marcus Kane. "Kane," Elon said immediately, snatching the phone. "I've got a lead," the investigator said, his tone brisk. "Victor Mason, the guy I mentioned, is still in the game. I've been watching some of his known associates, and I think they're connected to Ethan. The group's small but dangerous, real professional operators. They specialize in trafficking young women, using front businesses to cover their tracks. I've narrowed down one of their locations." "Where?" Elon asked, his pulse quickening. "There's an old warehouse on the west side, near the docks. Legitimately, it's registered as a shipping logistics company, but I've had eyes on it for a few days now. The activity there doesn't match what a normal business would be doing. It's quiet during the day, but at night, people come and go. Trucks too. If Clara's tied to this group, that warehouse might hold answers." Elon stood and began pacing the room. "And Ethan? Where does he fit into this?" "I've been watching him, too," Kane replied. "He's not just some barista. He's still connected to these people. I don't know what his role is, but he's keeping his head down for a reason." Elon's jaw tightened. The image of Ethan wearing Clara's pendant burned in his mind. If that young man knew anything, Elon would find a way to get it out of him. "I'm going to talk to him," Elon said firmly. Kane's voice hardened. "Be careful. If Ethan is still involved with these people, you don't want to spook him. He could run, or worse, warn the others." "I know," Elon said. "I'll be careful." He ended the call and grabbed his coat. There was no time to waste. The small bell above the door jingled as Elon entered Cafe Sienna, the warm scent of coffee and baked goods washing over him. Ethan was behind the counter, chatting with a customer as he poured a latte. His easy smile and relaxed demeanor were a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Elon's chest. Elon ordered a coffee, forcing himself to act casual as he approached the counter. Ethan greeted him with the same polite cheer as before. "Back again," Ethan said, handing over the cup. "Must be a fan of our brew." "It's decent," Elon said with a faint smirk, trying to match the younger man's light-hearted tone. He added after a beat, "You've got a good thing going here." Ethan shrugged. "It's all right. Pays the bills." Elon decided to push, testing the waters. "I've been thinking about that pendant you're wearing. It's been on my mind since the other day." Ethan's hand reflexively touched the pendant, his expression guarded. "Yeah, what about it?" "It's just unique," Elon said, taking a sip of his coffee. "You don't see many like it." Ethan chuckled nervously. "Guess I got lucky. A friend gave it to me, said it would bring me luck." "A friend?" Elon echoed, leaning slightly closer. "Do you remember their name?" Ethan hesitated. It was the briefest of pauses, but it was enough for Elon to sense the cracks in his facade. No, not really. It was a while back." "Strange," Elon said, his tone casual but sharp. "Something like that. You'd think you'd remember." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Elon's gaze. "Look, I don't really think about it much, all right. It's just a pendant." Elon didn't press further, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to grab Ethan by the collar and demand the truth. Instead, he pulled back, feigning indifference. "Fair enough. Keep it close. It looks like it means a lot to you." Ethan nodded, visibly relieved that the subject had been dropped. Elon finished his coffee and left the cafe, but he didn't go far. He waited outside, watching from across the street as Ethan cleaned the counter and chatted with customers. Hours passed before Ethan finally finished his shift. As he stepped out into the cold evening air, pulling a jacket over his shoulders, Elon followed at a distance. Ethan walked briskly, his hands in his pockets, his head down. He seemed to be heading toward the industrial part of the city. Elon kept to the shadows, careful to maintain his distance. Finally, Ethan turned down an alley that led to a fenced-off lot. Elon ducked behind a row of parked cars and watched as Ethan approached a side door. He glanced over his shoulder nervously before knocking twice. A moment later, the door opened, and Ethan disappeared. Inside, Elon's heart raced. He stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold air. The warehouse loomed before him, its windows dark and foreboding. Whatever was happening inside, he was certain it was tied to Clara. Elon's pulse thundered in his ears as he crouched near the warehouse's side entrance, the icy wind biting at his exposed hands. His breath fogged in the air as he strained to hear any sounds beyond the thick metal door that Ethan had disappeared behind moments earlier. The faint hum of machinery and muffled voices confirmed that the building wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. For a long moment, Elon hesitated. He wasn't a detective or a trained infiltrator. He was a father driven by desperation. But that desperation had carried him this far, and he wasn't about to let fear stop him now. Clara was somewhere out there, and this warehouse might hold the key to finding her. He pulled his phone from his pocket and texted Marcus Kane. "I'm outside the warehouse," Ethan entered. "Need backup or guidance?" "This feels wrong." The response came almost instantly. "Get out of there. This isn't the way to do it. Wait for me." Elon read the message, but didn't move. Waiting wasn't an option. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and surveyed the area. A stack of wooden pallets near the side of the building offered some cover, and he crept toward them, his movements careful and deliberate. From there, He had a better view of a narrow, cracked window above the door. The glass was grimy, but it provided a partial view of the interior. Elon could make out several figures gathered near a table piled with papers, laptops, and boxes. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across their faces, but Ethan was easy to spot. He stood near the edge of the group, shifting nervously as a man in a dark jacket barked orders. Elon strained to hear their conversation, but the thick glass muffled the words. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again, switching on the voice recorder. Raising the phone carefully, he held it near the open crack in the window. The voices grew clearer. Not enough. "We need results by the end of the week," the man in the dark jacket said, his voice sharp and commanding. Ethan replied, his tone defensive. "I'm doing what I can. She's not exactly easy to find. She gave you the pendant, didn't she?" The man snapped. "That means she trusted you. You were her contact. If she's still out there, she'll try to reach you again. And when she does, we'll be ready." Elon's heart nearly stopped. They were talking about Clara. "I told you," Ethan said, his voice rising slightly. "She hasn't tried to reach me in months. She probably got spooked and ran for good. Or she's hiding, waiting for the right moment," the man replied coldly. "Either way, she's still a problem. And if you can't bring her in, we'll handle it ourselves." Ethan stiffened, his posture rigid. "Look, I'm doing my best. Just give me more time." "Time's running out," the man said with finality. "We can't afford loose ends." Elon's hand tightened around the phone as a surge of fury coursed through him. They were hunting Clara, treating her as if she were some kind of threat. He wanted to storm in and demand answers, but he forced himself to stay hidden. This wasn't the time for impulsiveness. The conversation shifted as the group began discussing logistical details, schedules, shipments, and coded terms that Elon couldn't decipher. He pressed the phone closer to the window, recording every word. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from inside the warehouse. Elon flinched, ducking lower as the group turned toward the sound. A metal door slammed open, and two men entered, dragging someone between them. Elon strained to see. The figure was a young woman, her face partially obscured by her long, tangled hair. She struggled weakly against her captors, her movements sluggish, as if she were drugged or exhausted. "What's this?" the man in the dark jacket demanded. "Picked her up near the docks," one of the captors said. "Thought she might have seen something. Take her to the back," the man ordered. "We'll deal with her later." Elon clenched his fists, every instinct screaming at him to intervene. But he knew he was outnumbered and out of his depth. He had to get this information to Kane, and fast. As the men dragged the woman out of sight, Elon slipped back into the shadows, his heart pounding. He stopped behind the pallets and checked his phone to ensure the recording was saved. The faint red light confirmed it, and he exhaled in relief. Before he could move, the side door swung open, flooding the alley with light. Ethan stepped out, his head swiveling as he scanned the area. Elon froze, pressing himself against the wall. Ethan's expression was tense, his eyes darting toward the street and then to the shadows where Elon was hidden. He lingered for a moment before lighting a cigarette, his hands trembling slightly as he exhaled a plume of smoke. "Damn it, Clara," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Where the hell are you?" Elon's breath caught in his throat. Ethan's voice was laced with something unexpected. Guilt, maybe even fear. As Ethan finished his cigarette and re-entered the warehouse, Elon slipped away, keeping low and silent. Once he was far enough from the building, he pulled out his phone and dialed Kane's number. "What the hell did I just tell you?" Kane answered, his tone sharp. "I have a recording," Elon said, his voice low but urgent. "They mentioned Clara. They're looking for her, and they know about the pendant. I think Ethan's helping them, but I'm not sure he's entirely on their side." Kane's tone shifted. "Get back home. Send me the recording. We'll figure out our next move, but you need to stay out of sight." Elon nodded, though his resolve was unshaken. Whatever Ethan's role was, he was certain of one thing: the young man had answers. The air inside Elon's penthouse felt heavier than usual as he listened to the recording for the third time. Each word from Ethan and the others in the warehouse was a dagger twisting in his gut. They were hunting Clara, treating her like a loose thread that needed cutting. Worse, Ethan's role in the group seemed to teeter between loyalty and resistance. Elon couldn't tell if he was protecting her or leading her captors closer. He had already sent the file to Marcus Kane, who promised to dig deeper into the group and the mysterious man giving orders. But Elon couldn't sit idle. Every second felt like a countdown, a race against time to save his daughter before she vanished forever. Kane's call came just after midnight. "I've listened to the recording," the investigator said, his tone grim. "It's worse than we thought. That man giving orders, that's Victor Mason. He's the brains behind this operation. If they're actively searching for your daughter, it means she's a threat to them somehow. Maybe she escaped with information they don't want getting out." "She's alive, Kane," Elon said, gripping the phone tightly. "I'm sure of it now, and they're afraid of what she might do." "Agreed," Kane said. "But here's the twist. If Ethan was given the pendant, there's a chance Clara trusted him. He might have been her lifeline, someone she relied on to stay under the radar." Elon thought back to Ethan's expression outside the warehouse, the guilt in his voice when he muttered Clara's name. "He knows something," Elon said firmly, "and I'm going to get it out of him." "Careful," Kane warned. "If you push too hard, he could run. Or worse, tip Mason off." Elon hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I can't wait anymore. If Ethan's got answers, I need them now." "Then tread lightly," Kane said. "And remember, these people don't play fair. One wrong move, and it's not just your daughter who'll pay the price." The next day, Elon returned to Cafe Sienna, his resolve steely as he stepped through the door. The warm hum of the cafe felt jarringly at odds with the storm brewing inside him. Ethan was there, wiping down the counter between orders. He greeted Elon with a nod, his usual friendly demeanor in place. "Back again," Ethan said with a faint smile. "I'm starting to think you're addicted to our coffee." "Something like that," Elon replied, sliding onto a stool at the counter. He waited until the other customers drifted away, then leaned in slightly. "You've got a moment. I wanted to talk to you about something." Ethan glanced at him, wary. "Sure. What's up?" Elon lowered his voice. "The pendant." Ethan's hand immediately went to the charm around his neck, his expression tightening. "What about it?" "I know where it came from," Elon said, his tone measured. "I know who it belonged to before you got it." Ethan froze, his hand still resting on the pendant. For a moment, his mask of calm slipped, and panic flashed in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan said quickly, turning away to adjust the espresso machine. "Elena Clark," Elon said, using the name of Clara's alias from the recording. It was a gamble, but it paid off. Ethan's hand stilled, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the counter. "How do you know that name?" Ethan asked, his voice low and tight. "I know a lot more than you think," Elon said, leaning closer. "I know you're involved with Victor Mason. I know you were her contact. And I know she's still alive." Ethan turned sharply, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anger. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "Then start talking," Elon said, his tone firm. "Where is she?" Ethan glanced around the cafe, ensuring no one was within earshot. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of whatever he was hiding had grown too heavy to carry. "She came to me months ago," Ethan admitted in a whisper. "She was desperate, scared out of her mind. Said she needed to disappear. I didn't ask questions. I just helped her the best I could. And the pendant?" Elon asked, his voice softer now. "She gave it to me," Ethan said, his fingers brushing over the charm. "Said it was important. Said I had to keep it safe, because if something happened to her, it might be the only way someone could know she was alive." Elon's heart clenched. Clara had trusted Ethan enough to give him the pendant, to make him a part of her plan to stay hidden. "Where is she now?" Elon asked, his voice thick with urgency. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know. After a while, I lost contact with her. She stopped showing up at the spots we used to meet. I thought maybe she'd gotten out. But then Mason started asking questions. He thinks she's still out there, and he's hellbent on finding her. Why didn't you go to the police? Elon demanded. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. The police. Against people like Mason? You don't get it. These guys are everywhere. They've got connections. If I'd gone to the cops, I'd have disappeared faster than you could say my name. Elon stared at Ethan, his emotions warring between anger and gratitude. The young man's fear was palpable, but so was his guilt. Whatever Ethan had done, or failed to do, he had tried to help Clara. She's my daughter, Elon said finally, his voice breaking. I need to find her. And if you know anything, you need to tell me now. Ethan's jaw tightened as he looked away. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, reluctantly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper. This is where we used to meet, Ethan said, sliding it across the counter. It's a long shot, but maybe she left something behind. Elon picked up the paper, his hands trembling. It was an address, an old diner on the outskirts of the city. If Mason finds out I told you this, I'm dead, Ethan said, his voice barely audible. He won't, Elon said, his determination renewed. You've done the right thing. As Elon stepped out of the cafe, the slip of paper clenched tightly in his hand. He felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Clara was still out there, and now he was closer than ever to finding her. The address on the slip of paper led Elon to the outskirts of Manhattan, far from the gleaming skyscrapers and bustling streets he was accustomed to. The neighborhood was quiet, almost eerily so, with rows of shuttered businesses and cracked sidewalks buried under a thin layer of snow. The diner sat at the corner of a desolate intersection, its neon sign flickering weakly in the dim light of early evening. Elon parked his car across the street and stared at the building. Its once bright exterior was now weathered and peeling, the windows fogged over from the cold. He felt a knot tighten in his chest as he stepped out into the icy air. This place was Clara's last known connection. If there was even the faintest chance that it held answers, he had to take it. The bell above the door jingled softly as Elon entered. The smell of grease and stale coffee filled the air, and a handful of customers sat scattered across the diner. A waitress behind the counter glanced up from her notepad, her expression disinterested. Elon approached her cautiously. "Excuse me," he said, pulling out the slip of paper. "I'm looking for someone who might have come here. A young woman named Clara. Or she might have used the name Elena. Has anyone like that been around recently?" The waitress frowned. "I don't know. We get a lot of people passing through. What's she look like?" Elon's throat tightened as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo of Clara. It was an old picture taken on her 16th birthday, but it was all he had. "This is her," he said, his voice low. The waitress took the photo, studying it for a moment. Her brow furrowed. "Yeah, I think I've seen her. She came in a few times, always looking over her shoulder, like she was afraid someone was following her." Elon's heart pounded. "When was this?" "Couple months ago, maybe longer," the waitress said, handing the photo back. "She didn't talk much, just ordered coffee and sat in that booth over there." She pointed to a corner booth near the back of the diner. "Thank you," Elon said, his voice barely audible as he moved toward the booth. The seat was cracked and worn, the table scratched from years of use. Elon slid into the booth, his hands resting on the cold surface as he scanned his surroundings. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt compelled to stay, as if Clara's presence lingered in the air. His eyes caught something wedged between the wall and the seat, a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. He reached for it, his fingers trembling as he pulled it free. Unfolding the paper, he saw a hastily scrawled note. "If you're reading this, I had to run. They're getting closer. I'm sorry I couldn't stay, but I couldn't risk leading them to you. Don't trust anyone." Elon stared at the note, his chest tightening. The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's. She had been here, hiding, and leaving behind breadcrumbs for someone to find. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He answered without looking at the screen. "Kane." "It's me," the investigator said, his tone urgent. "I've been digging, and I found something big. Mason's group has a secondary location. It's an old storage facility about 30 miles outside the city. If Clara's on the run, she might have been heading there, or hiding from it." Elon's grip on the phone tightened. "Give me the address." Kane rattled it off, and Elon scribbled it on the back of the folded note. "You can't do this alone," Kane warned. "Wait for me. I'll call the authorities, and we'll plan this right." "There's no time," Elon said, already heading for the door. "If Mason's people are on the move, I can't wait." "Elon." The call ended as Elon slid into his car, his resolve unshakable. The drive to the storage facility was harrowing, each mile stretching like an eternity. The sky had darkened into a thick blanket of clouds, and snow began to fall in soft, swirling patterns. Elon's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white. Clara's note replayed in his mind, her words tinged with both urgency and sorrow. When he finally arrived, the facility loomed like a fortress in the middle of nowhere. Rows of rusted shipping containers and storage units stretched into the distance, their edges softened by the falling snow. The only light came from a single floodlight near the main gate, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. Elon parked his car a safe distance away and approached on foot, his breath clouding in the cold air. He spotted two men near the gate, their silhouettes framed by the harsh light. They were armed, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. He ducked behind a row of containers, his heart hammering. His mind raced as he considered his options. He had no weapon, no backup, and no plan beyond finding Clara. But he had come too far to turn back now. A sudden noise caught his attention, a faint shuffling sound coming from one of the containers nearby. He crept toward it, his steps careful and silent. As he reached the edge of the container, he saw a figure huddled against the cold metal wall, a young woman, her face obscured by a hood. She flinched as he approached, her eyes wide with fear. "Clara," Elon whispered, his voice cracking. The woman's eyes met his, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. She was thinner, her face pale and hollowed, but there was no mistaking her. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. Elon fell to his knees, his arms wrapping around her as tears streamed down his face. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got you." But the moment of reunion was shattered by the sound of voices growing louder. The guards had noticed the commotion. "Stay behind me," Elon said, his voice firm as he helped Clara to her feet. The danger was far from over, but for the first time in a year, Elon felt a spark of hope. "Stay behind me," Elon whispered, his body positioned protectively in front of Clara as the voices grew louder. The guards were moving closer, their heavy footsteps crunching through the snow. Clara gripped his arm tightly, her frail body trembling. "Dad, you shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice cracking. "If they find us, they'll kill you." "I'm not leaving without you," Elon said firmly, his eyes scanning the shadowy maze of shipping containers for a way out. Clara's breathing was shallow, and he could feel her weight pressing against him. She was weak, exhausted, her frame alarmingly thin under the oversized hoodie she wore. He didn't know what she had endured in the past year, but the haunted look in her eyes told him it had been hell. The voices were almost on top of them now. Elon spotted a narrow gap between two containers and gestured for Clara to follow him. They slipped into the space just as a flashlight beam swept over the area where they had been moments before. They were here, one of the guards said, his voice sharp. "Keep looking." Elon held his breath, his arm around Clara as they pressed themselves against the cold metal wall. The guard's footsteps echoed ominously, the beam of his flashlight bouncing off the frost-covered surfaces of the containers. "We need to move," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. Elon nodded and led her deeper into the labyrinth of containers, their movements slow and deliberate. The guards were thorough, their flashlights cutting through the darkness in sweeping arcs. Finally, they reached the far edge of the facility, where the containers thinned out and the landscape opened to a stretch of snow-covered woods. Elon scanned the area, his mind racing. They couldn't outrun the guards in Clara's condition, but they needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the facility. "Over there," Clara said, pointing weakly to a cluster of trees. Elon helped her across the open ground, their footsteps muffled by the snow. The woods provided some cover, the shadows deeper here, but it was clear the guards weren't giving up. He could still hear them shouting, their voices carrying on the wind. When they were a safe distance into the trees, Clara sank to the ground, her legs giving out beneath her. Elon knelt beside her, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, I'm not okay. I'm so sorry, Dad. I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to put you in danger." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Elon said, his voice firm but gentle. "None of this is your fault. You did what you had to do to survive, and I'm here now. We're going to get through this together." Clara sobbed quietly, burying her face in his chest. Elon held her tightly, his heart breaking at the sight of her so fragile and broken. "We need to keep moving," Elon said after a moment, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Can you walk a little farther?" Clara nodded, though her movements were sluggish. Elon helped her to her feet, supporting her as they made their way deeper into the woods. After what felt like hours, they came upon an abandoned cabin nestled in a clearing. The structure was small and rundown, but it was shelter, and Elon knew they couldn't afford to keep wandering in Clara's state. He pushed the door open, the creak of rusted hinges echoing in the still night. The interior was sparse, with a broken table and a few rickety chairs scattered across the floor. There was an old fireplace against one wall, its hearth filled with ash and debris. "Sit here," Elon said, guiding Clara to one of the chairs. She sank into it, her head resting against the back as she closed her eyes. Elon searched the room, his eyes landing on a pile of firewood stacked in a corner. He grabbed a few logs and set to work, his hands shaking as he fumbled with an old box of matches he'd found in a drawer. Finally, a small flame caught, and the fire grew, casting a warm glow over the cabin. Clara opened her eyes, the flickering light reflecting in their depths. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon sat beside her, his hands clasped tightly together as he tried to piece together what to do next. They couldn't stay here for long. Mason's men would be searching for them. He needed to get Clara to safety, but first he needed answers. "Clara," he said gently, "I need to know what happened. Why were they after you? What do they want?" Clara hesitated, her eyes flickering with fear. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to shield herself from the memories. "I didn't know what I was getting into," she said finally, her voice trembling. "It started when I saw something I wasn't supposed to. They were moving girls, young girls, through the city. I tried to stop them, Dad. I thought if I exposed them, they'd go down. But instead, they came after me." Elon's stomach twisted as he listened. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked, his voice heavy with anguish. Clara shook her head. "I couldn't. They said if I told anyone, they'd kill you. I didn't want to risk it." Tears welled in Elon's eyes as he reached for her hand. "You should have trusted me. I would have done anything to protect you." "I know," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "But I didn't want to lose you." And then it all spiraled out of control. "I ran, but I couldn't run far enough. They've been hunting me ever since." Elon felt a surge of rage toward Mason and his network, but he pushed it aside, focusing on Clara. "You're safe now," he said, squeezing her hand. "I'm going to get you out of this. I promise." Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and doubt. "You don't know what they're capable of, Dad." "I don't care," Elon said firmly. "Whatever it takes, I'll make sure they can never hurt you again." The fire crackled softly, filling the silence between them. For the first time in a year, Elon felt like he had his daughter back, even if just for a moment. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of winter day that seemed to sparkle despite the chill. The streets leading to the outskirts of Industrial District were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within Elon's heart. Clara sat beside him in the passenger seat of the rental car, her eyes fixed on the frost-covered trees rushing by. She hadn't said much since the plan was set in motion. Her exhaustion was evident, both physical and emotional, but Elon could see something else in her face: relief. After months of running, she no longer had to face the darkness alone. "Are you sure about this?" Clara finally asked, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm sure," Elon said, keeping his eyes on the road. "This ends today." Clara didn't respond, but she reached over and rested her hand lightly on his. Elon gave it a reassuring squeeze. At the staging area, the tension was palpable. Marcus Kane stood near the SWAT commander, his arms crossed as he reviewed the operation plan one final time. Officers moved in quiet efficiency, checking their weapons and testing communication lines. Elon parked the car at the edge of the lot and helped Clara out. She wrapped her coat tightly around her frail frame, the cold wind biting at her cheeks. Kane approached them, his expression grave but resolute. "This is the best shot we've got," he said. "Ethan's intel was solid. We know Mason's operation is running out of that storage facility, and we've got warrants for the other properties tied to him. It's all happening at once. Coordinated raids, no room for escape." "What about Clara?" Elon asked, his protective instincts sharpening. "She's already been through enough. I don't want her anywhere near the action." Kane nodded. "We've got a safe zone set up nearby. She'll stay there until this is over." Clara shook her head, her jaw tightening. "I want to see this," she said, her voice firm despite its softness. "I want to know it's real, that he's done." "Clara," Elon began, but she interrupted him. "I need this, Dad," she said, her eyes pleading. "Please." Elon hesitated, then sighed, his shoulders slumping. "All right, but you stay back, where it's safe. Promise me." Clara nodded, her determination unwavering. The SWAT convoy moved with precision, the sound of engines low and steady as they approached the storage facility. Elon and Clara rode in one of the unmarked cars, trailing behind the main team. The tension in the vehicle was thick, every breath measured, every glance charged with anticipation. The facility loomed ahead, a stark reminder of the horrors it had housed. Rows of shipping containers stretched into the distance, their rusted exteriors glowing faintly under the floodlights mounted along the perimeter. The convoy stopped a safe distance away, and the officers fanned out, taking their positions. Elon and Clara were led to a vantage point behind an abandoned warehouse, far enough to avoid danger, but close enough to see the action unfold. The SWAT commander's voice crackled through the radios. "Teams in position. Go on my mark." Elon's heart pounded as he held Clara close, her slight frame trembling against him. 3, 2, 1, go. The command was followed by an explosion of movement. SWAT officers stormed the gates, their weapons raised, their shouts echoing through the night. The sound of a battering ram splintering the facility's entrance sent a shiver down Elon's spine. Inside, chaos erupted. Mason's men scrambled to respond, but they were outmatched. Flashbang grenades lit up the darkness, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. From their vantage point, Elon and Clara could see the operation unfolding in stark detail. Officers moved with precision, clearing rooms and securing the area. Clara gripped Elon's arm tightly, her nails digging into his coat as her breath hitched. "There he is," she whispered, her voice trembling. Elon followed her gaze and spotted Victor Mason being dragged out of the main building, his wrists cuffed behind his back. He was a tall man with sharp features, his expression twisted into a mask of fury and defiance. Even in defeat, his presence was chilling. "Victor Mason," one of the officers barked. "You're under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, and a whole list of other charges. You'll get the details downtown." Mason spat on the ground, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Clara and Elon in the distance. His lips curled into a snarl, and for a moment, Elon felt the weight of the man's malevolence. "He knows we're here," Clara said, her voice barely audible. "Let him know," Elon said, his tone steely. "He's finished." Mason was shoved into the back of a police van, his shouts muffled as the doors slammed shut. The sight of him being taken away sent a wave of relief washing over Elon. "It's over," he said softly, turning to Clara. "It's really over." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Thank you, Dad." In the weeks that followed, Mason's empire crumbled. Ethan's testimony proved invaluable, providing critical details about the inner workings of the operation. His cooperation earned him a reduced sentence, and though his path to redemption would be long, it had begun. Clara's recovery was slow but steady. She began therapy to process the trauma she had endured, and Elon was there for her every step of the way. Their bond, once unbreakable, had been tested and emerged stronger than ever. On Christmas morning, the penthouse was filled with warmth and light, the smell of pine and fresh coffee mingling in the air. Clara sat cross-legged by the tree, her face aglow as she unwrapped a small box. Inside was a delicate bracelet, its silver chain adorned with tiny stars. "It reminded me of the pendant," Elon said, watching her reaction carefully. "I thought you might like it." Clara smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her face. "I love it," she said, clasping it around her wrist. Then she handed him a box of her own, wrapped in gold paper. "This is for you," she said softly. Inside was the star-shaped pendant she had worn, the one that had been her talisman through the darkest moments of her life. "You should keep this," Elon said, his voice thick with emotion. "No," Clara said, shaking her head. "It kept me safe when I needed it most. Now it's your turn." Elon slipped the pendant over his head, the cool metal resting against his chest. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking, "for surviving, for coming back to me." Clara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for never giving up." As the snow fell gently outside, father and daughter sat together, a family reunited at last. The road ahead would not be easy, but they faced it together, and that was all that mattered.